The Packers will not be drafting an edge rusher at 23, and we can prove it. The Green Bay Packers had one of the best all-around defenses in the NFL last year, but there was one glaring problem. Rashawn Gary was the only Packers player to consistently get pressure on opposing quarterbacks. The problem was so bad that Brian Guttenhurst and Matt LaFleur addressed the need for improvement as a focal point in their end-of-the-year press conferences. Since then, fans have suggested every possible solution, from signing Josh Sweat in free agency, to drafting an edge rusher in the first round, to even trading for Myles Garrett when he was available. Some fans are so desperate for a solution, they believed a rumor on Facebook that Clay Matthews was coming back to coach his D-line, even though there literally was not a single source attached to that rumor. But the crazy part about this lack of pass rush is that the Packers still finished top 10 in sacks last year ahead of teams with great pass rushers like the Eagles, Steelers, and Chiefs. So how did Hafley pull this off? Well, to offset the lack of production from the D-line, Jeff Hafley had to take a huge risk and get creative with his play calling to confuse offensive lines and generate pressure on quarterbacks. Usually, defense coordinators prefer to be more conservative and risk adverse. So you would have to think edge rusher would be at the top of Hafley's wish list, right? Well, in this video, we're going to break down Jeff Hafley's mentality and why his philosophy on defense means that the Packers won't be taking an edge rusher early.
Defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley took the helm last year, and we learned that Hafley's defensive scheme doesn't prioritize the defensive line as much as it does the defensive backs. During our research for this video, we found that Hafley loves to generate pressure with simulated blitzes. And a simulated blitz is when the defense shows before the snap that they're going to send pressure with a lot of players, but they end up only rushing with 4 players. And those 4 players who rush the quarterback might include a linebacker or a defensive back, all while a defensive lineman drops into coverage. A simulated blitz is an excellent way to play mind games with the opposing quarterback. It's really just a game of now you see me, now you don't. And since Hafley loves to dial up simulated blitzes and put big boys in the pass coverage to confuse the opposing quarterback, he prioritizes athleticism and versatility in his front 7. He needs linebackers that can blitz, and he needs defensive linemen that are athletic enough to drop into coverage. You can also see Hafley's lack of prioritization of the defensive line through the Packers' most recent transactions. In 2024, the Packers drafted 4 DBs and 0 defensive linemen. This year, they let their best run-stopping defensive lineman leave in free agency, which was TJ Slayton, and didn't sign any linemen and paid a bunch of money to Nate Hobbs. At a young age, my mom told me that if you don't know what a person cares about, then see what they are spending their money on. And if you follow what the Packers are spending their assets on, then you can see that Jeff Hafley loves defensive backs and Brian Gutekunst is obliging. And who can really blame him? Hafley coached defensive backs for a long time, and he wants the Green Bay DB unit to be the best in the NFL. But does that mean that he should ignore the needs that he has on the defensive line?
Hafley's back-to-front approach isn't the only new thing for this Packers defense. The D-line also had to adjust from Joe Barry's 3-4 scheme to Hafley's 4-3. We've discussed the difference between these two schemes in other videos, but essentially the change comes to philosophy. In the 3-4 scheme, linemen are given the responsibility of 2 gaps. Their goal is to engage, read, and react to the ball, which requires a more slow-paced approach. While in the 4-3, linemen are assigned a single gap they're responsible for and playoff instincts. The idea being with limited responsibilities, linemen can play more fast and free to aggressively attack the hole.
Now, I believe there was some mention of holes?
Phrasing, boom.
That's the spirit.
Personally, I always prefer the 4-3 scheme when I play DN, but the Packers D-line must not, because according to their numbers, they did not do well with the change. They were worse in everything from hurries to run stops to PFF scores. Why is that though? You could argue that the players on the current roster just don't fit with Hafley's scheme, but I don't necessarily think that's the actual answer. The Packers front office would have done more to overhaul this unit if the players just didn't fit the scheme. Instead, it comes down to Hafley's style of play. His whole mentality is to play aggressively and attack. He wants that from his players too. The simulated pressures aren't a solution to some pass rush problem. They're the core of what he loves to do. Just like he loves playing a safety in the box or close to the line of scrimmage pre-snap to throw quarterbacks off. But that aggressive nature does come with a risk. The Packers defense was exploited by play action passes last year. 6 different quarterbacks had 10 plus play action pass attempts against the Packers last year, and according to NFL stats, only week 1 Jalen Hurts had a negative EPA. Jared Goff and Sam Darnold combined for 38 completions on 48 attempts for 337 yards and 2 touchdowns with a passer rating of 118. But those are the good quarterbacks, right? What about like Will Levis or Caleb Williams? Well, they went 15 of 20 for 217 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a passer rating of almost 138. If you're getting cooked by Will Levis, you have a problem. And I know we aren't the only ones seeing this issue either, because in the Vikings and Lions' second game against the Packers, they both increased the amount of play action passes they called. In fact, the Vikings even went and doubled it. Hafley is having to commit more guys to stopping the run, and backers are overreacting on their read steps because the defensive line is just not getting the run stops by themselves. This is creating holes in zones that even the worst quarterbacks can exploit. The Packers need to add a lineman who can disrupt opposing teams' run games and still be athletic enough to drop into coverage on simulated pressures.
Therefore, Walter Nolan is the perfect option for the Packers in the first round. If you don't know who Walter Nolan is, then I'll tell you this. The man is really good at football. Nolan was a former 5-star high school prospect. He was ranked the best overall prospect in his high school class, and he was voted as an All-American after his junior year at Ole Miss. Nolan is 6'4", 300 pounds, and he is an athletic freak of nature. In 2024, he had 6 sacks, 25 QB hurries, and an overall PFF grade of 89, which is one of the highest amongst all defensive linemen. We think the Packers will draft Walter Nolan because Jeff Hafley will fall in love with Nolan's athletic ability to drop into coverage for those simulated blitzes that he just loves to dial up. Nolan is an excellent run stopper, and he can rush the quarterback pretty damn well. This may not be the sexy pick that a lot of Packer fans want, but Walter Nolan will fortify the interior defensive line, especially after losing TJ Slayton in free agency, and with Kenny Clark getting up in age, and Packers having a potential out in Clark's contract in 2026. The Packers know how to develop talented players, and I wouldn't be shocked to see Walter Nolan become one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL in a couple of years. And Nolan can help this top 10 Packers defense become top 3 or even the best in the entire NFL.
So when the Packers are on the clock at pick 23, don't expect them to take an edge rusher. Jeff Hafley's scheme prioritizes defensive backs and athletic front 7 players who can drop into coverage, and Walter Nolan fits that mold perfectly. His ability to stop the run, disrupt the pocket, and execute in simulated pressures makes him an ideal pick to shore up this defense and reduce their vulnerability to play action. It might not be the flashy move some fans are hoping for, but it's the right one for how this defense operates. What do you think though? Should the Packers take Nolan or should they go in another direction? Let us know down in the comment section, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more draft analysis. Thank you so much for watching. We're the RFL Show, and we'll see you in the next video.